So then, in this video, I'm going to be talking about why paternosters are not dangerous. Now, all over the internet, there's all these different websites and YouTubers and videos all saying that the paternoster is a dangerous lift. And it really isn't. It's no more dangerous than an escalator. It is only dangerous if you deliberately misuse it. So here is this paternoster in Copenhagen in Denmark. Now the design of this paternoster is different to the Prague ones because the paternoster cars do not have a ceiling. They don't have a roof on the cars. And in a moment I'll do a comparison in safety between Prague and Copenhagen's paternosters, but let's first start off with the similarities between them, and that is the flaps. So when on your upwards journey, every single floor you go past has a flap on it, which means if you were to lean out of the paternoster, you would not be crushed because the flap on the floor gives way to you. The flap lifts up as you hit it, so you don't get crushed. That is, as long as there isn't like a heavy fat person standing on the flap, then you'll get crushed by their body weight. But other than that detail, you cannot get crushed on the upwards journey, apart from at the top. But I'll come on to that detail later on. As for the downwards journey, this is where the designs differ. Because the Prague paternoster, the cars have a ceiling, they've got a roof, which means if you were to step out of the paternoster too late in Prague, you could potentially get banged into by the ceiling of the paternoster car. And I'm going to argue that this Copenhagen paternoster is safer because the cars do not have ceilings. So you can step out as late as you want and you'll never get banged by the roof of the paternoster car. But what about the next car above it coming down? Now that has a flap and that's on both designs. So if you found yourself in a very bad position, let's say you tripped as you got out the paternoster and you were then lying on the floor, but your legs were dangling into the paternoster shaft, you would still not get crushed because of that flap on the paternoster car, and that will give way to you. So you cannot get crushed on both directions and on both designs. The only difference is the Copenhagen paternoster has got more leeway to getting out late without the ceiling coming down and banging into you. Now the ceiling of the cars don't go all the way to the floor. It's still got a gap, so you can't get crushed on both designs. You just potentially could get banged into on the Prague ones. So the Copenhagen ones I'd argue is a better design, but they do have a negative. The ceiling of a paternoster car in Prague also doubles up as having a barrier on it, as it gives you a visual reminder. If you walk up to a paternoster and you can see that barrier right in front of you going past, that tells you don't step in at this moment, there is no paternoster car there. Meanwhile, the Copenhagen one doesn't have a ceiling, so therefore it doesn't have the barrier, which means you just got an open shaft when the paternoster car's not there. So if you were to just not look where you were going and just step into the shaft while the paternoster car's not present, you would fall all the way down to the next car, and that would be a bad thing. So it's pros and cons. Which accident is more likely to happen? People stepping into the paternoster shaft when the paternoster car's not in the right position and falling down, versus people getting out of the paternoster car late and then getting banged by the ceiling of the car. I'm going to argue the Copenhagen design is better, but honestly that can be debated because you could say that a Prague design's better. They've both got pros and cons. Now, apart from the issue at the very top of the shaft, which I'll come on to in just a second, the other way a paternoster can be dangerous is if you deliberately misuse it. If you deliberately try to step across outside of one of the cars and then fall down the shaft. But to do that, you'd have to literally try and jump out of the car, out and above the car, down to the side of the shaft to fall down. You'd have to deliberately do that, and you'd be a complete idiot. So to be honest, that's your own fault if you do that. And the only other thing is if you try to put goods in the paternoster, if you try to put objects in it, because it's not designed for that. But to be honest, other than those things, I'm going to argue these paternosters are safe. Now, let's talk about the one point where you can get crushed, and that is the very top of the shaft. That's because you have a physical hard edge at the top. Unlike all of the floors, which all have flaps which give way to you, the very top of the shaft can't, because you have to have a physical structure right in front of the entranceway to the paternoster car. So it comes right up to you, and if it hits you, it won't give way. It's concrete. And that's because that is where the wheel sits. The wheel at the top has to sit directly in front of the cars at the top. However, you can still mitigate this risk. There's still a flap, and the purpose of that flap is to try and push you out of the way, as well as that particular flap has a safety circuit on it to stop the paternoster if it gets hit. So it still cannot crush you, but that's the only point with that risk. However, this particular paternoster has got a second reason why it also can't crush you, and that is because it starts turning before that hard concrete edge gets all the way to the floor of the paternoster car. So this design is actually very good. Let's take a look. Got wooden tracks. Interesting as well, because they don't have a roof, which I'd argue is actually safer. Yeah, nice view of it actually. So because it doesn't have a roof, it's safer because the top of it can't crush you. So actually for example, when the next one comes round, then that bit there is a flap. Yeah, so that's a flap, so if you're there, it will lift the flap up, which will... So that's what I'm going across, and I'm going to argue that not having a roof actually makes it safer, because the bottom has a flap, so that lifts up if you were to get your foot caught. Then the roof is completely wide open, so if you were to lean out like that, it's not going to crush you. You can see workings of it a lot easier on this one actually. Big wheel, look at that. Look at that for a big wheel. Let's go for a trip round the top. Stand back. Put that in the way so you can't get hit by a wheel so bad. There, if you stick your hand there, that's where the train can get you. That's probably the only bit of this that's dangerous, is that point. The other point, which is the only point where you can potentially get crushed, is the very topmost bit of a paternoster. So I'm now going to show you the only bit of the paternoster where it potentially has that danger. So I'm just going to show it a bit again because it went through too quick. So that first bit's the flap. I'm not going to do it because it'll stop it. And then that is soft, but see there, that bit, that's the hard edge. That's the one and only hard edge of the paternoster. Oh, and this one can't crush you because it doesn't go all the way up. Clever. But usually they go slightly higher as they go down. And because that there is the only hard edge just below the wheel, that's the only point on the paternoster where you could potentially get crushed. But they've very well protected it on this one. You were leaning out, that flap would move, so that doesn't crush you. That bit is soft, but then that's the hard edge right there. That's the hard edge, that's the bit that can crush you. But it's already turning. The hard edge doesn't come all the way to the floor, so this paternoster can't crush you. This one's actually really safe. This is actually the safest paternoster I've come across. Because usually when the paternoster starts turning, because this one starts turning here, so it starts turning, so that floor reaches the flap which moves, but the hard edge of the wheel is, it doesn't reach that, so it can't crush you. But normally the wheel's higher, and that hard edge, just sitting below the wheel where the hard edge is, that's the only crushing risk on a paternoster. That's the only place on the entire paternoster where you could potentially get crushed. So let's go down, take a look at the bottom of the paternoster this time. So let's now go down, take a look the other way. Danger, keep distance. And it's now going down. On the bottom of the paternoster, there's no crushing risk at all. Unless, of course, you stick your hand in the chain, but come on, you have to be absolutely stupid to do that.